In the previous video, we have seen some interview questions on collections framework. So this is completed. In this video, we will see what are exceptions and how to work with exceptions in Java. So what are exceptions in Java? Before going into exceptions, first we need to learn about errors. So what are errors in Java? There are mainly two kinds of errors in Java. One is compile time error, and the second one is runtime error. So let's see what a compile time error is and what a runtime error is. Let's see an example first, and then we will understand what these compile time errors and runtime errors are. I am creating a new package first, and the package name is exceptions examples. Click on finish, and under this package I am creating a class which is errors and exceptions. So the class name is errors and exceptions. Now I am using main method also, so click on finish. Okay, the class is created. Now what I am doing is I am writing a simple program. What I am doing is I am creating 5 integer variables. So I will say int a equals to 10, and then int b equals to 1, and I'll say int c, d, e. So this one is 2, this one is 5, and this one is 10. So what I would like to do is I would like to divide this a with each of these other integer variables like b, c, d, and e. So what I will do is I will say system.out.println. I will say first division is plus a by b. This is what I am doing. And similarly what I will do is second division is a by c. Third division is a by d, and fourth division is a by e. So I don't need this one. So this is what I am doing. So I took one variable a equals to 10 and 4 more integer variables b, c, d, e, 1, 2, 5, 10. Okay, now what I am doing is I am dividing this variable a with each of these 4 variables b, c, d, e. So and I am printing the values here a by b, a by c, a by d, and a by e. So this is a simple program. So let's see what is a compile time error and what is a runtime error. Now let's say while defining this integer variable, if I say something like instead of int, I am saying in. So what happens is in the background it compiles by default. We don't need to compile this program in Eclipse. Eclipse, what it does is it compiles it whenever we make any changes. So it compiled and it is throwing an error saying that in cannot be resolved to a type. What it means is it is saying that in is not a data type. That means during compilation itself it is throwing an error saying that in is not a data type. So this is compile time error. So compile times errors are reported during compilation itself. So compile time errors are produced during compilation of the program. So this is compile time error. Now let's see what is a runtime error. Now we have created this program. Let's run this one. Run as Java application. And you can see that it is printing the results 10, 5, 2 and 1. First division, second division, third division and fourth division. 10, 5, 2, 1. Now let's say I made this C value as 0. So what happens is when 10 divided by 0, it is not possible. Let's run this one. Run as Java application. And you can see that the first division, it has printed the first division. First division is 10. It has printed that one. Here is the first division. First division is 10. It has printed the first division. But for the second one, since C value is 0, A by C, it is producing an error. And this error, it is resulting at runtime. So these are called runtime errors. So these are runtime errors, and this will be produced at runtime. And these runtime errors are called exceptions. And these runtime errors are called exceptions. So these are the two kinds of errors. One is compile time error and runtime error. So compile time errors are reported during compilation itself, and runtime errors are reported during runtime, and these runtime errors are called exceptions. Now let us say here I have given a value of 0 to C, and it is producing an exception when it is running this line, because it is trying to divide 10 with 0 and it is producing an error which is nothing but an exception. So it is producing an exception. So what I want to do in this case is, I don't want to stop this here because of the exception. I don't want my program to be stopped here at this line because of the exception. I want to proceed with the remaining statements after this line. Even though it is producing exception, if you see here, my program is completely stopped here. So at this point, it is completely stopped. So now I don't want to stop my program because of this exception, but I would like to proceed with this remaining two lines also. That is where it comes the exception handling. So we have to handle these exceptions. Now let us see how Java actually produces these errors and exceptions. We have two classes for that. One is error and another one is exception. Let's see that one. So these are the two classes, error and exception. Using these two classes, Java handles the errors and exceptions. And these error and exceptions are subclasses of Throwable class. So Throwable class is the super class for all the errors and exceptions. Anyhow, object class, this is a super class for all the classes in Java, but Throwable class is a super class for error class and exception class. Again, under exception we have checked exceptions and unchecked exceptions. So we will see them in a couple of minutes, what are checked exceptions and unchecked exceptions. But for now, just remember that we have a super class which is Throwable, and error class and exception class, they are the child classes of this Throwable class. And under exception we again have two classes which are checked exceptions and unchecked exceptions. We have two exceptions which are checked exceptions and unchecked exceptions. So now how to handle these exceptions? So now how to handle these exceptions? There are mainly 5 keywords in Java which we use to handle exceptions. They are, one is try, catch, finally, throws, and throw. So these are the 5 keywords we use to handle exceptions in Java. Out of these 5 keywords, these 3 belong to one group, and this is one thing and this is one thing. So out of these 3, out of this first group, try and catch are compulsory ones, and finally is an optional one. So these two, try and catch, are compulsory ones when we are handling exceptions, and finally we can have as an optional one. So how do we handle the exceptions? Let's see with the first one, try, catch, finally. How do we handle the exceptions? Using try, catch and finally. So in the previous program we have seen that the code A by C, so I'll say system.out.println. So let's say sysout, and it is A by C. It is producing an error. Okay, so we know that this is producing an error. So what we will do is we will keep this one in a try block. Whatever the code that produces, that gives problem, that gives exception, we'll keep it in a try block. So once we put it in a try block, after this we will have a catch block. And in the catch block, we will print the exception, or we will print whatever we want to print. For example, I will say system.out. I will say system.out.println. So sysout, I will say sorry, there is an error. Or we can directly print the exception also. Okay, so we use a try and catch blocks to catch the exceptions, and finally we can have a finally block. This is optional, so we can have a finally block, and we will have a set of statements here. So what is this finally block? Finally block is used to execute a set of statements whether an exception is raised and handled in try catch block or not. That means finally block executes whether this has raised an exception or not. It doesn't care, it will just execute after these statements. For example, why we use finally block? Finally block is used, for example, if you want to close some database connections, or if you want to close some files and all those things, then we can use this finally block and we will write the code within this finally block. So this is about try, catch and finally. Now let us see about throws keyword. So throws keyword, what is throws keyword? A try catch block is used to handle exceptions, and we will put the piece of code that produces an exception in the try block, this block. Okay, but sometimes what happens is, sometimes the compiler, Java compiler itself knows that some pieces of the code may produce exceptions, and those exceptions should be handled before compilation itself. For example, file handling. Let's say I want to read some file at the location in a K drive. K, some test dot, some Excel file. I would like to read this file. Okay, so this is a file reading operation. This file reading operation, I want to read the file test.xls, which is in K drive. But when I run the program, I don't have K drive in my system. So what happens is, it produces an exception. But the compiler, when we are trying to compile the program, the compiler itself knows that some of these operations will produce an exception, and those exceptions have to be handled before compiling itself. So either we can have a try catch block here for these kind of programming statements. But let's say if we have a lot of statements like this, then the code will become cumbersome. That means the code becomes very confused. I mean, if any other developer wants to see the code, it will be very confusing for them. That's why we can use a throws keyword in that case. So compiler itself says that, okay, you have to handle it using a try catch block, or you need to use throws keyword. So using that one, we have to handle those keywords. We have to handle those exceptions using throws keyword. So before compilation itself. Now, these kind of exceptions are called checked exceptions. That means whatever the exceptions that the compiler already knows that a particular piece of code may cause problems and have to handle them before compilation itself, those kind of exceptions are called checked exceptions. And all the other exceptions that we can handle using try catch block, they are called unchecked exceptions. Okay. So that's about throws keyword. Now let's see about throw keyword. So throw keyword is used when we want to intentionally raise an exception. That means a particular piece of code won't cause any problem. It will run very smoothly, but we want to raise the exception. Then we can use a throw keyword. For example, let's say I have written a program where I want to verify the age of the voters. If the age of the voter is greater than 18, then they are eligible to vote. Otherwise, they are not. So, I will say if age is greater than 18, not greater than, let's say less than. So, if age is less than 18, then what I would like to say is I would like to throw an exception here. So, I will say throw new arithmetic exception. Arithmetic exception of sorry. So I can do this one. I can throw the exceptions intentionally using the keyword throw. So these are the 5 keywords we can use to handle exceptions in Java. Let us see this one more time. What are exceptions in Java? So before going into exceptions, we need to know what are errors. There are mainly 2 kinds of errors in Java. One is compile time error and another one is runtime error. As we have seen it in the program, if we specify it something like instead of int a, if I specify it as in a, then before running the program itself during the compilation, it results in an error saying that in is not a valid data type. That means that is a compile time error. During compilation itself, it is throwing an error. So during compilation itself, it will throw an error. So this is called a compile time error. Runtime error. Runtime error means, let's say I am dividing something by 0. This won't cause any problem during compilation, but during a runtime, it will produce an error. So these are caused during runtime. So these are called runtime errors, and these runtime errors are called exceptions. And let's say, as seen in the previous program, I don't want my program to be stopped because of these exceptions. So I have to handle those exceptions. How to handle the exceptions in Java? There are mainly 5 keywords using which we can handle exceptions in Java. They are try, catch, finally, throws and throw. Out of these 5, the first 3, try, catch, finally, these are one group, throws is one and throw is another one. So in the first group, try, catch, finally, try and catch, they are the compulsory ones. That means we have to declare them to catch the exceptions. And finally is an optional one, and finally is used to execute a piece of code whether the code in the try catch blocks produces any exception or not. Finally just executes. Okay. So how to use try catch finally? Let's say, as seen in the previous program, this is the line of code a by c, system.out.println a by c. This is the line of code that is producing an exception. So whatever the pieces of code that produces an exception, we put it in a try block. So try and then flower brackets. After this try block, we have to write a catch block. Catch, and then we will write some set of statements here to print out that error. And once you do this one, once you write this try catch block, the system won't stop at the line that is causing the problem. Instead of stopping there, it prints out the message that we have written in the catch block, or what are the actions that we have written in the catch block, and then proceeds with the next steps of programming. So this is how we will catch an exception in Java using try catch block. Finally, we can have a finally block also. Finally and a set of statements. So this finally block executes whether the piece of code in the try catch blocks, it produces an exception or not. It just executes. So this finally block can be used for closing the database connections or for closing the files, etc. So this is how we can catch exceptions using try catch block. And what are the exceptions that we catch using try catch block? They are called unchecked exceptions. Now let's come to the throws keyword. So what is a throws keyword? Sometimes what happens is the compiler itself knows that some pieces of the code will cause problems. That means they may cause exceptions. In those cases, it will warn us before compilation itself. Before running the program itself, during compilation, it tells us that, okay, you have to handle these particular pieces of code. For example, let's say I have a K drive. Let's say I want to read some test.xls file on a K drive, but I don't have K drive in my system. So definitely the line of code produces an exception when we run it. But before us, the compiler itself knows that this is a file reading operation, and file reading operation may produce input-output exception, or it may produce file not found exception. So it will tell us, it will give an error saying that you have to handle this piece of code. So what we can do is we can use a try catch block at that moment to handle that particular line of code. But let's say if we have lot of lines of code, that compiler already knows that all those lines of code will produce exception. So in those cases, we have to write a lot of try catch blocks, but that will be very cumbersome. That means that code becomes like a very confused code. So instead of using a try catch block, we can use a throws keyword. We'll see an example on this one, but for now just remember that throws keyword is used whenever, for checked exceptions. So these are called checked exceptions. That means compiler already knows that some pieces of code may cause exceptions, and those kinds of exceptions are called checked exceptions, and we handle them using throws keyword. Okay, now let us see throw keyword. So the throw keyword, if we want to intentionally raise an exception, we use throw keyword. Okay, that means even though the piece of code or the lines of code may not produce anything, any error or any exception, we still want to intentionally raise exceptions sometimes. In those cases, we use throw keyword. An example is, I want to check the age of voters. So if age is less than 18, then I want to throw an exception here. I'll say throw new arithmetic exception sorry. So this is how I can use a throw keyword. We will see an example on this one as well. In this video, we have seen what are errors, what are compile time errors and runtime errors, and what are exceptions. If you want to download the document for this one, you can go to my repository at github.com/subboostech and then go to selenium-java-tutorials. This particular video starts with number 24, and this is the document exceptions. What are exceptions and how do we work with them? You can download this document. In the next video, we will see some examples on using try catch blocks.